There is great value in looking things up. And I think it's more than just curiosity would that ought to lead a person to look things up. Sometimes if you've got a problem and you and you actually want to solve it and it's in the way and you've got some time, or you're solving a problem as a way of kind of like optimizing your life, because if you solve one problem now, it becomes it the barrier is reduced for the future. So you spend a little bit of effort here, and then tomorrow that effort kind of pays interest, and then the day after, and then the day after. So if you work on something now, for forever in the future, it will become more and more of value having spent that time. And working on your mind as a general idea is something that pays off. And working on knowledge obviously does pay off, but there's something that's kind of in there, kind of like a curiosity, where you're swimming in a culture, maybe more than one. That's one of the unique qualities of I mean, what do we call it? Like a post-Christian Western world, which has come from lineages of different cultures. Now, why and the morality of it, the history of it, doesn't really matter, but the fact is that cooked right into the English language are roots from historical events as well as mythology. And it's all useless to go and learn, technically, because you know how to use the words. But there's more to be had in understanding certain things. So, some examples would be understanding the Roman or Greek roots of things. So, learning about the story behind words like hypocrisy, and how there are actual people behind the coining of these terms. Learning, and it's more complex, but learning some of the philosophies behind things, at least peripherally. I mean, you've got access to YouTube. You can go and look up somebody really smart spending a lot of time and education, and it's distilled from even more people and a whole lot of intellect down into something that's 10 minutes. And if you're curious, you can just go and spend the 10 minutes, and maybe just a couple of ideas will stick in you. But it's time well spent, because it's sating a curiosity that you might never have known you have. So I want to give you a few examples of that. There are things you know, but you don't really know why you know them. You don't know where they're from. So for example, if I look at this, I'll see um, I'm gonna look at numbers, for example. Okay. So you'll recognize the numbers pretty well, right? Right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you might think, okay, well, these are kind of old versions of stuff, and you'd be right. Okay. And okay, well, you know these numbers. Okay, you can think they're kind of old, and maybe you don't write your number 1 like that. Maybe you write your number 1 like that, and maybe you do a number 2 like that, right? And 3 is nice and curved. However you learned it, there are roots up there, and it's just interesting to know. But here's why it's interesting. See if you can guess the pattern. You're learning a new thing. It's a little bit weird, isn't it? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And none. You've learned a thing. It's not really useful, is it? Not really. I mean, you already know your numbers. You know the style that we currently use. But but now what? That's cool. It's just cool. And if that's all it is, then you just learned in a minute or two something more, something about the history of it. I'll give you another example. And this was something that really, I knew some of it, but knowing this more completely really helped kind of instill in me the need for being curious, not necessarily having a point to there being a curiosity at all. So you should recognize this. Okay? Some of you will have already caught on. Maybe you actually recognize these. Right? Okay. Well, okay, that's a planet, right? Oh, you know what the sun is? Maybe some of you'll recognize, hey, that's, maybe you know that from a movie. That's a god. Okay, you know what that is? Okay, well, you guess what they are? I already knew that Freya is another deity. I had heard of Woden because people make comparisons to Woden with an ancient version of Christianity, and I've never heard of this one. And this one always confused me. So I went and I looked. I went and I looked kind of everything up. And here's what I learned. Okay, so we know what moon is. Tiyu, as it turns out, um, is like Mars. Okay, a planet. I got it. But also like Ares. Now, Mars is named after a god of war, and so is Ares. And a lot of people that understand just a touch of mythology will know about that. Okay, so the moon, maybe that has some meaning, right? War, god of war, and Woden, it also Mercury, and Mercury is another god, and you'll recognize that we named the planet Mercury. And also Hermes, and and this is also associated with, say, Odin. And if you know who Thor is, maybe you know who Odin is. Again, gods, because these are old ideas here. This list. Okay, well, you know who Thor is. I mean, that's kind of simple, right? But it's also like, right? You already know that Thor. Maybe if you know Thor, Thor is not just some kid. He's actually a god, the god of thunder in some mythologies, and it's also associated with Zeus, which is from a different pantheon, let's call it. But it's also Jupiter, another planet and another god. And you might recognize some of these. Maybe there's a link to some that you'll recognize some links between some of these as being from the same kind of religion. And there's even more of that. Okay, so Freya. Well, you can guess that Freya is another god, right? Okay, well, yeah. Okay, Venus, another planet. We've got a theme. And Some of you will know who Aphrodite is, what god that is. And this is also okay, Saturn planet, that one's pretty obvious. So Saturn is also that's a little bit obscure, but that's another god. I believe that's the god of time. Saturn is like the god of agriculture, and all of these have a particular kind of field. Like, so Freya is love, beauty, and like the leader of the Valkyries. And if you know who that is, so she's a fighter. She's a fighter and a lover. And in Norse, it's the goddess of love. And it's so you'll find some parallels because a lot of these beliefs have been neighbors for a very long time, and a lot of the movement of people and the culture they bring with them will be inspired by and will find similarities with other people elsewhere. Hey, you like rice too? I like rice. You do this with your rice? Hey, I do this with my rice. You can't say that there's like a you can say that there's a common bond there, that rice, but they might be totally alien cultures. They just met one another, went, hey, oh, you do this. I never thought about frying it with oil. I should try that. Or I never thought about steaming it, or etc. And it's kind of the same thing and borrowing a little bit. Okay, well, why did I make that list? And why is it like this? Okay. And why do you already know what all of that is? Moon's Day, Tuesday, Woden's Day, Thor's Day, Freya's Day, Saturn's Day. Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Totally useless knowledge. But so cool, isn't it? And you can go and look up the meaning of a word or an idea. You can play pretend like you understand the meaning underneath things, but go and spend an afternoon, spend a weekend afternoon. All you're doing is sitting at home, maybe you're watching a movie, maybe you don't know what to do. Anytime you come across anything that you think might have a story behind it, write it down. If you've got a bad memory, like me, then bring a notebook with you, a little pen, ritualize it. Don't be afraid to bring it in public, break it out, and write down a thought, an idea, something that when you go home or when you're a little bit, when you're withdrawn and you want a little bit of quiet time to think, pull open that notebook and go and look up one of the ideas, one of the words, one of the phrases, and see if there's a history behind it. See if there's something curious to learn. You're going to have to spend some time both learning how to write down the things that you're going to have to recognize when there's something to even go and discover more about, and how to describe it, how to go and look for answers, where to go and look for answers, because you're going to get maybe you need to discover which histories to go and look at. Maybe you wouldn't realize that it's different cultures will have a different kind of story for the same thing that you're using. And maybe you can look at multiple cultures for history or multiple stories. Go and look up a lot of the fairy tales, the mythologies. If you're watching a movie, for example, find some of the most loved movies you have and see if they're based on a book, and see if the book is based on a fairy tale, and go find the fairy tale. Go read it. Go read I've actually done this on my channel. Go and look up one of the sources of the collected stories that was combined by something like the Brothers Grimm, which is a pair of brothers who happen to be called Grimm. It also happens that their stories are kind of grim. And I wonder if that's why we have the word grim. And go find Cinderella. or Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or anything like that. You think you know the stories. Well, they're based on fairy tales. They're not the same as what you might know. And for example, Cinderella. You might know the story about Cinderella. You might sit down and watch it for the umpteenth time because you were a kid and you loved it as the cartoon, and you watch maybe the new versions of it and all that kind of stuff. But did you know Cinderella is called that's not her name. She's called Cinderella as kind of a mean nickname, and by her stepsisters, because she was forced to sleep by the fireplace and she got sooty. So cinders from the fireplace. Cinderella, because she was always sooty. That's why it was such a big change, and why she wasn't exactly recognized when she washed herself and she dressed herself and she went to a ball. Why people didn't recognize her, why it was really this hidden beautiful girl who went out dancing, and how when she got home and she cindered herself back up again, people wouldn't necessarily know that she had gone dancing. So go pay attention to things, pay attention to culture, to media, find out where it comes from, and maybe, just like learning about the days of the week, just like learning about numbers, you'll learn something interesting and new.